The French National Assembly has opened a controversial debate on immigration, which is part of an effort by the government to heed voters' concerns about migration.
Next, the French government insisting it will still enact tough measures against illegal migration after the National Assembly rejected its flagship immigration bill.
The French government has said it is considering all options, including declaring a state of emergency after a third night of escalating violence and rioting in cities and towns across France.
4,000 police and soldiers fan out across train stations in Paris, Lyon, and Marseille. They move through crowds with purpose. Papers are checked, people are pulled aside, some are handcuffed. Families watch in shock. The interior minister's voice cuts through the chaos. Do not come to France. We will tolerate nothing. It's zero tolerance. This isn't a scene from a film. This is June 2025, France.
Shortly before 6 a.m., police in Paris begin the eviction, removing nearly 450 migrants living in the historic Gaîté Lyrique Theater.
Just a few years ago, if you told someone that France, the birthplace of the Declaration of the Rights of Man, the country that rallied behind liberty, equality, brotherhood, would one day deploy thousands of armed officers to round up migrants on trains, they probably wouldn't have believed you. But here we are. France has made a bold move. It's no longer debating immigration policy in parliament. It's conducting military-style operations in civilian spaces. It's declaring war. So what happened? How did one of Europe's most progressive nations shift so much? What chain of events? What fears, what political calculations led France to this point? Well, today on Across the Globe, we're going to trace that story. So buckle up, because France's transformation isn't random. It's not a sudden madness. It's the result of mounting pressure from outside, from within, from the far right, from ordinary people that finally snapped the system. And what France does next could reshape the entire continent. To begin, let's start with 2023. It was a turning point year, though most people didn't realize it at the time. That June, Paris caught fire. Literal fires burned in the suburbs. Riot police clashed with crowds night after night. Cars were torched, shops were looted. The initial spark was a police shooting. The incident itself was tragic, but it was also the kind of thing that happens occasionally in cities everywhere. What made it different was what came next. Within hours, far-right politicians were on TV, and Marine Le Pen's party started posting online. Media figures started connecting the dots in a very specific way. This chaos, they said, proves that mass immigration has destroyed France. Essentially saying, this is what happens when you let too many foreigners in. This is the price of failed integration. While critics argued that police violence and economic inequality in the suburbs was mostly to blame, the immigration narrative was too useful. It was too clean. One cause, one solution. Close the borders. For weeks, the riots continued. Over 45,000 police were deployed. Then the moment passed. But something had shifted. Immigration was no longer just a policy issue. It was linked, in the public mind, with chaos and danger. Then came October. A teacher named Dominique Bernard was stabbed to death at his school in Arras. The attacker was a young man of Chechen origin who had arrived in France as a refugee when he was 5 years old. The killing was shocking and brutal, and it unleashed something.
From France, we learned a teacher has been killed and 2 others wounded in what French authorities are calling a suspected terror attack.
Every news program led with the story. Near enough politician made a statement. The question that dominated wasn't, how do we prevent violent extremism or what's driving radicalization? The question was, how was this person allowed to be here? How did the system fail? Why didn't someone stop him before he became dangerous? By the time the dust settled, the Arras attack had become the proof that anti-immigration hardliners needed. They didn't have to argue theory anymore. They could point to a slain teacher and say, this is what immigration looks like. This is the cost. And the government watched this all unfold. Macron's administration was already under pressure from multiple directions. The far right was gaining in polls, the public was anxious, but now there was blood on the ground. So what happened? The political calculus shifted, and they needed to act. So when Interior Minister Gérald Darmanin introduced a new immigration bill late in 2023, it was with a sense of urgency. This wasn't a thoughtful, deliberative process. This was a government responding to crisis and pressure, and they didn't hold back. Then, in June 2025, it all came to a head. The raids happened. Thousands of officers played their part in coordinated operations across the country. At the Gare du Nord, Bruno Retailleau, the new hardline interior minister, stood watching as police processed migrants off trains. According to Info Migrants, during a nationwide inspection of public transportation ordered by Retailleau, authorities arrested 691 foreigners. Around 100 were deported, and approximately 30 were detained. No lengthy appeals process, no time to find a lawyer. Get on a train without papers, and within hours, you could be on a plane leaving France or locked up awaiting deportation. For the government, this was a win. They'd promised action, and now they had proof. For many French people, it felt like finally someone was taking control. For others, immigrants, advocates, international observers, it felt like something fundamental had been broken. But these raids didn't happen in a vacuum. Understanding why requires zooming out and looking at the broader crisis that was building. In 2023, France received approximately 145,000 asylum requests, a 26% jump from 115,000 in 2022, and the highest since 2016. In French media and politics, 145,000 was framed as a crisis. And when politicians keep repeating something, people tend to believe it. In September 2023, Lampedusa, the Italian island where Mediterranean migrants first reached Europe, was overwhelmed. Over 8,000 arrived in a single week. Italy pleaded for help. France refused. Interior Minister Gérald Darmanin went on television and said France would not accept any of those migrants. Not one. He even suggested France would help Italy send people back to Africa instead. This showed a huge shift. This wasn't a centrist balancing compassion and security. This was a government drawing a hard line. The public was ready for it. Anxiety about immigration was tangled up with other fears. Housing shortages, job insecurity, overcrowded schools and hospitals stretched public services. A huge amount of the public stressed the desire for less immigration. Politicians just needed to deliver. But there was more than economics driving this. The heiress teacher's death was still fresh. Before that, the nation was shocked by the murder of a 12-year-old girl named Lola in 2022 by an immigrant who should have been deported. These cases made the abstract threat of immigration feel real and present. There was also a cultural anxiety. Some French people felt their country was changing too fast. Would French culture survive? Would France still be France? Far-right politicians like Marine Le Pen had been pushing this message for years. And now it was resonating because people felt squeezed on multiple fronts at once. On top of all this, Europe itself was tightening. Germany was cracking down after 2015. Italy had elected a hard-right government promising to stop the boats. Austria and Denmark were also cracking down. The message across Europe was the same. Migrants are not welcome here. By 2023, France felt under siege. Whether that was actually true mattered less than how it felt. Following Macron's introduction of the new immigration law, the debates in Parliament became blunt and vicious. Macron's own party split over the bill. The left opposed it fiercely, and the right said it didn't go far enough. Through all of this, the government kept adding tougher measures: faster deportations, stricter family reunification, limits on welfare for asylum seekers. Some proposals, like immigration quotas, crossed into territory that would have been unthinkable in French politics just years before. Marine Le Pen called it an ideological victory for her movement. She was right. The entire spectrum of French politics was shifting, and far-right ideas were becoming mainstream policy. The bill passed in December of 2023, but the Constitutional Council struck down about a third of it. Immigration quotas were ruled unconstitutional. Limits on benefits were rejected. It was a significant rebuke from the judges. But instead of reconsidering, Macron ordered his ministers to implement whatever survived immediately. Then came 2024. Macron dissolved parliament and called snap elections, betting on a mandate. He lost that bet and got a fractured National Assembly with no majority. So what did he do? He made a deal with the Conservatives, bringing in Michel Barnier as Prime Minister and Bruno Retailleau as Interior Minister, both hardliners on immigration. Within weeks, Retailleau issued directives to regional officials: deport more, regularize less. This wasn't advice, it was a command. France had shifted from a centrist government trying to balance values to a right-leaning government laser-focused on one thing: pushing people out. The entire machinery of government was pointed in one direction. This cuts it by about 55% while preserving the key points: party split, far-right victory, court rejection, government defiance, political shifts, and Retailleau's directives. So now we've broken down the timeline. What does this crackdown actually look like? What does a government at war with immigration actually do? The train station raids we talked about? Well, they're just the beginning. In June 2025, the operation at Gare du Nord, and across the country, wasn't an anomaly. It was the new operating procedure. Get on a train without valid papers, and you're now entering a zone where random identity checks happen constantly. Officers board trains. They move through cars. They ask for documents. If you can't produce them, you get taken off. Within hours, you could be processed and issued a deportation order. There's no lengthy bureaucratic process. There's no time to gather documentation or find a lawyer. The system is designed to move quick. France also reimposed internal border controls. Why is this significant? Because France is part of Schengen, a system that's supposed to allow free movement across European borders. It's one of the EU's defining achievements. But France basically opted out, at least temporarily. There are now police at the Italian border in the Alps. There are checkpoints where travelers crossing from Spain or Germany get stopped. There are officers checking IDs. For the first time in decades, you can't just drive from Italy into France without encountering officers in uniforms asking where you're going and who you are. The government justified it as temporary, a response to terrorism and migration. But these temporary measures keep getting extended. They're becoming permanent. As we mentioned, the government has also streamlined deportation procedures. If you're a foreigner accused of a crime or deemed a security threat, the path from accusation to deportation is now a lot shorter. There are fewer appeals and much fewer chances to argue your case. Gérald Darmanin bragged about this in previous statements, saying the new law gave authorities unprecedented power to expel delinquents, their word for foreign nationals they want to remove. There are also plans to restrict the Aide Médicale de l'État, AME, the program that provides healthcare to undocumented migrants. The government wants to tighten eligibility requirements, reduce the services covered for adults, and add seniority requirements for some benefits. It's not a complete cut, but a narrowing. Critics, including doctors and medical professionals, warn this will push untreated illnesses into emergencies, which end up costing hospitals more in the long run. The government's logic is different, though. Make it harder to access care and people will leave. Then there's ongoing talks of reintroducing a criminal offense for illegal residents. This is a throwback to laws that were replaced years ago as Europe moved toward more humane standards. If you sneak into France illegally, you could face jail time. Not just deportation, but actual incarceration. Even more intense, the government announced a new immigration law for 2025 with a shocking provision, extending detention of undocumented migrants from 90 days to 210 days. That's 7 months locked up while waiting to be deported. 7 months in a detention center with no freedom. No major Western democracy has imposed detention on this scale in recent decades. It's extreme, but it doesn't end there. There's also the huge enhancement of the border force. It pools police, gendarmes, and potentially even military resources to reinforce any border zone at any time. If there's a perceived migration threat at any border, they can be deployed. Its border security elevated to a level France hasn't seen in peacetime. To understand the scale and intensity of what's happening, look at Operation Wambushu in Mayotte.
They have begun their first reconnaissance missions. Police forces brought to the French island of Mayotte as reinforcement have begun tracking down illegal settlements.
Mayotte is a French territory in the Indian Ocean, off the coast of East Africa. In 2023, the government deployed roughly 1,800 police and soldiers there. Their mission? Take back control. What that meant in practice was demolishing migrant shanty towns with bulldozers. It meant armed police sweeping through neighborhoods. It meant rounding up thousands of undocumented residents. Rights groups described the scenes as a humanitarian disaster, and residents called it apocalyptic. Journalists reported that migrants were hunted, humiliated, and insulted. Families were separated. People were deported back to countries where they might face persecution. The operation's name, Wambushu, means take back, and it was explicitly framed as reclaiming control. But that operation was just a preview. Retailleau and Barnier are now looking to apply that same model to mainland France. That same intensity, that same willingness to deploy armed forces against populations deemed to be there illegally. In 2025, France's enforcement is in overdrive. Police raids on construction sites to find undocumented workers. Camps of migrants being cleared from Paris and other cities. Operations happening regularly, almost routinely. The government brags about the numbers. Arrests up, deportations up, residence permits down. They treat it like a scorecard. Every statistic is a victory. And there's a sense that this is just the beginning. More laws are planned, more enforcement is coming. The crackdown has momentum, and there's no sign of it slowing down. But this intensity hasn't gone unchallenged. There's been serious resistance from multiple directions. In January 2024, tens of thousands of French people took to the streets.
France's Constitutional Council has rejected several measures in a controversial immigration law that sparked protests across the country.
In Paris, Lyon, Marseille, and dozens of other cities, people marched in protest. They held signs that read, "No à la loi immigration," no to the immigration law. They carried banners saying migrants equals humans and France, land of asylum. These weren't just professional activists or NGO workers. Families marched, young people marched, teachers marched. Regular French citizens were saying that their government was betraying France's values, that this wasn't who France was supposed to be. Civil society organizations mobilized too. Doctors' unions warned that cutting medical care would lead to preventable diseases and eventual emergency room chaos. Churches spoke out, invoking Christian values of compassion. Labor unions pointed out that the economy needs migrant workers in agriculture, construction, healthcare, and countless other sectors. Teachers warned that the climate of fear was affecting refugee children in schools. And it wasn't just France. The United Nations Special Reporter on Racism released a statement saying the law violated France's commitment to equality and was actively fueling xenophobia. Human Rights Watch published a report calling the law an attack on migrants' rights and a concession to the far right. France's own Independent Defender of Rights, a body established to protect citizens, said the law strikes at the heart of Republican principles. These aren't fringe organizations or radical activists. These are serious institutions saying France has crossed a line. There was also internal government friction. Some of Macron's own parliamentarians voted against the law or abstained from voting. A health minister resigned in protest over the direction immigration policy was taking. Macron's centrist party was literally being torn apart by this issue. On the left, he was being attacked for betraying French values and playing into far-right narratives. On the right, he was being criticized for not going far enough. He was trapped in the middle, taking fire from both directions. What's interesting is that the far right wasn't actually satisfied, even though they'd won. Yes, they had achieved an ideological victory. Their ideas had moved into the mainstream, but they wanted more. Marine Le Pen pushed for a referendum on immigration, arguing that only a direct popular vote can impose truly tough measures. She implied that even Macron's aggressive policies were insufficient. It's a telling dynamic. There's no finishing line here. The goalposts just keep moving. The harder the government gets, the more the far right says it should go harder still. Internationally, there was friction brewing fast. Italy's government complained about France tightening border controls, suggesting that France was using them to funnel migrants toward Italy instead. Within the EU, officials worried that countries were basically competing to see who could be the toughest on immigration, which threatened the entire European project. Free movement, one of the EU's foundational principles, was under genuine threat. There's also a human cost that's impossible to ignore. Images of police raids, families being separated at train stations, people living in fear of deportation. These things are reshaping French society. For those who support the crackdown, it feels like finally the government is taking control. For others, it feels like a betrayal of what France claims to be. And for immigrant communities and French citizens of immigrant backgrounds, there's a feeling of being targeted. Reports of racial profiling increased, police stops concentrated in immigrant neighborhoods, a climate of suspicion, fear, and uncertainty. Now, we need to zoom out again, because what's happening in France is part of a much larger European story, and that larger story matters. Right now, across Europe, far-right or hard-right parties are either in government or wielding significant political power in roughly half of EU countries. Italy has a far-right prime minister. Hungary has been cracking down on migrants for years. Poland has hard-right governments. Sweden just moved right. The Netherlands is moving right. Even traditionally progressive countries are shifting. And the trend is connected to one issue more than any other: immigration. Many would say it's how politicians win elections, how they rally supporters. It's become the defining political battle across Europe. And there's a race happening, a race to see who can be toughest, who can be most credible in their opposition to immigration. Because if you're not tough enough, the far right will move in and claim they're the ones who will actually protect the country. France isn't just participating in this race, it's winning it. The country has moved from having serious debates about humanitarian obligations and immigration policy to deploying thousands of armed officers in train stations to round up migrants. If France, the land of human rights, the nation that gave the world the Declaration of the Rights of Man, is doing this, then it signals something powerful about where Europe is heading. It suggests this is becoming normal. It suggests other countries have permission to go further. The European ideal of free movement, the principle that makes Schengen work, depends on all countries sharing a basic commitment to it. But if every country is reintroducing border controls, if every country is competing to be harshest on migrants, then the system breaks down. You get a Europe that's closing in on itself rather than opening up. You get fortress mentality replacing the post-Cold War vision of a unified, borderless continent. The EU tried to solve this with a migration pact agreed in 2023. After a decade of disagreements, countries finally compromised on a framework for modernizing asylum rules and distributing responsibility more fairly. But now, big players like France are going their own way. The pact is unraveling. Countries aren't cooperating. They're unilaterally imposing barriers and calling it control. For migrants, this has real consequences. Safe routes are closing. Dangerous routes become more appealing. More people die trying to cross the Mediterranean. Camps overflow. The crisis doesn't disappear when you close borders. It just gets worse at the margins and in the places outsiders don't see. There's also a values question that's harder to quantify but still very important. For decades, Europe positioned itself as different from authoritarian regimes because it stood for human rights, democracy, and rule of law. But when democracies start treating certain groups, i.e. migrants and religious minorities, as less deserving of rights, what does that distinction mean? If Europe's main claim to moral superiority is human rights, and Europe starts violating those rights, what's left? Well, some observers think France's approach could become a template. If it works politically and doesn't result in major international consequences, other countries will copy it. You could see a race not just to be tough, but to see how far you can go. Europe becomes increasingly fortress-like. Borders harden, movement becomes restricted. The post-1989 dream of a unified continent gets replaced by something more fragmented and defended. But there's another angle to look at here, another possibility. France's experience could be a cautionary tale. The social upheaval, the images of police raids, the international criticism, these things could energize opposition. Civil society groups are organizing. Pro-refugee movements are building strength in some places. Young people are protesting. The question is whether that resistance will be strong enough to stop the momentum or just delay it. For France specifically, this is also about national identity in a deeper way. France sees itself as the home of the revolution, the beacon of liberty, and it has done since 1789. It's in the national DNA. But if France is now defined by aggressive border control, by deportations, by treating migrants as invaders, then something fundamental has changed. Is France still France? Or has it become something else? That's not just philosophical, it matters for how French people see their country and themselves. It matters for how the rest of the world sees France. The nation that once prided itself on offering refuge to the persecuted is now telling the world to stay away, and it's happening fast. 5 years ago, most of what's happening now would have seemed politically impossible. Now, it's normal. Laws that would have been unthinkable in 2015 are treated as common sense in 2025. Politicians who'd have been dismissed as extremists are now setting government policy. Ideas that lived on the fringes are now at the center. So the question for Europe is simple, but huge. Is this temporary? Is this a reaction to a crisis that will pass? Or is this the new permanent state? Is France the outlier that's gone too far? Or is France showing everyone else where they're headed? Has the country provided a solid blueprint? The answer probably depends on what happens in the next few years, what other countries do, whether civil society pushback is effective, whether the approach actually solves anything or just creates new problems down the road, whether people decide the price of this kind of control is too high. What's certain is that France has made a choice. It's chosen to declare war. What that war means for France, for Europe, and for the millions of people trying to escape poverty, violence, and war to find somewhere safe, that story is still unfolding. And it's a story that will echo far beyond Paris. What about how Greece solved the immigration crisis?